Now we're going to come to the book of Ecclesiastes again, and this time chapter 2. And don't forget, it's the wisest man who ever lived who wrote this book. And he is going to open up his heart, and he is going to tell us exactly what he learnt in life. And he's writing this at the end of his life. He died about 59 years of age. And so he must be in his mid-50s, late 50s perhaps, when he wrote this book. And he is telling us how he passed his life. And he starts off by saying in actuality that he communed with his heart, and he said, well, I want you to enjoy pleasure. But he found that was vanity. There was nothing in pleasure. And then laughter, oh, it's just mad, he said. So he looked at more tangible things in life. He looked at wine. And then he looked on folly, I suppose comedy, to find out really what was good for the sons of men. You know, what they should do all the days of their life. And really, in a very real sense, this is very important. What should we be doing with our life? After all, it's given unto man once to live, once to die, and then the judgment. We only have one life. What are we going to do with it? Well, King Solomon started acquiring things. And he said, I made me great works. I builded me houses. How many houses can you live in? I planted vineyards. I made gardens, orchards. I planted trees. I don't suppose he planted one tree. When he said he planted trees, he meant his servants planted trees. For all kinds of fruits. I made me pools of water to water wherewith the wood that bringeth forth trees. And then he said, I got me servants, maidens, had servants born in my house. Also I had great possessions of small and great cattle above all that were in Jerusalem before me. And remembering that Israel is an agricultural nation, therefore he got all these trees and pools of water and cattle. And then he turned to other things. He said, I gathered me also silver and gold and the peculiar treasure of kings. And then he said, I got men singers, women singers, musical instruments. And I was great and increased more than them all. And whatsoever mine eyes desired, you see, I got. I withheld not my heart from any joy. And then he comes up with this thought. Then I looked on all the works that my hands had wrought, on all the labor that I had labored to do, and all was vanity and vexation of spirit, and there was no profit under the sun. You know, this thought of acquiring things. You know, what does it profit? You know, we were in India once, my wife and myself, we were having seminars, and we had an administrator who had been a lieutenant colonel in the Air Force, a chaplain, and He had gone before us, and he had prepared the hotels and the places where we were going to have these seminars. And he had arranged that after the seminar, somehow we would have a day off before going to the next seminar. And, of course, that's always a blessing if you're preaching, because you can have time to prepare for the next seminar. But he said, I want you to come with me down into the center of the town of this place where we were. He said, because it is known for its silverware. And he said it's known also for the beautiful tea sets of silver. Old English, they somehow got into India, and here in the marketplace we can buy them. And we went with him, and I was wondering, and the Lord was saying, well, what profit is there in acquiring this silver, these teapots? And he was very insistent. And so we followed him, and I don't know if we bought a trinket or so, I don't know. But the Lord said it has no value. Well, that dear brother has already gone to be with the Lord, and I don't know what good his silver did him. And as you look at these verses, King Solomon had the ability to acquire things. I don't know if you've ever moved, but on occasions we have moved. And it's amazing when you move how much stuff you have acquired doing your séjour at this certain place. And you look at the things that you have acquired, and so often they have been put on shelves and things like that. And what was the purpose? We got them, thinking they would give us great joy. But in actuality, they had no purpose whatsoever, just trinkets. He said he acquired houses. I remember that my wife and I were visiting a certain church. It was a very large church. It was a very notable church in those days. And we were directed to a lady in this church who, if I could say this, was very kind, and she entertained ministers. And one of the things she said to my wife, she said the pastor, it was a lady pastor, came to my house, and she looked at my house and she thought it was so wonderful. All the things that I have put in my house. But she said, in reality, none of this means anything to me. It has no real meaning. And why did Solomon acquire all these things? I'm thinking of Charles de Gaulle, the president of France. And after he had retired from office as president of France, he retired to his farm. And his farm naturally backed onto other farms. And one day he looked over the fence of his farm into the other farm, and he called the owner and he said, I would like to negotiate to buy this field of your farm because, it touches mine and I like to enlarge mine. Well, de Gaulle died before he could negotiate the sale. But the owner of the other piece of land said, I don't know why the general wanted to have this other piece of land. He's got enough. He's got enough. You know, when you think of it, and when you look at Solomon's acquisitions, one of the things you realize is this, that the more you have, the more people you need to look after your possessions. You see, in this farming of Solomon, he had more cattle than, any before him. And yet, he had to have more servants, more maidservants to look after them. The more orchards he had, the more pools of water he had to have, the more servants he had to have to take the water to the trees and the orchards so that they would spring up. And in actuality, what did it do for him? The acquisition of all these things. And he said, I looked at all my labor, and he said, I realized that it had not, satisfied me. And there was no profit from it. As we go on in this psalm, and I'll come back to some of these verses, but I want to look at verse 23 with you. And he's speaking in verse 22 of the man, who has labored, and all his days of sorrow and travail, grief, yea, his heart taketh not rest in the night. Now, I knew a man, and he used to come with his family. In fact, I knew his daughter quite well because she was on our staff and also been a student in our Bible school, and I think afterwards married a pastor. But it's a very interesting story. He owned a cork factory. Now, in all probability, very few of us know anything about cork, and I must confess I'm amongst you. But I did learn something about this cork factory, that the heat had to be very stable in manufacturing this cork, and if the heat was too great, the whole thing could explode. Now this man, who was in his late 40s, I think 46, 47, 48, when I knew him, was not able to come with his wife and daughter to the seminars we had and conventions we had in Switzerland, because he had no rest at night, wondering if the heat of the factory would go up too quickly and explode the cork. He had absolutely no rest. And yet, what was the end of the story? Well, the end of the story, unfortunately, was at the age of 48, he had a heart attack from all this stress, no rest at night, and he died and left his widow and his daughter, and I think another daughter too. But you see, what did he gain from owning that cork factory? He could say, well, I own a cork factory, and certainly it brought in a certain revenue, but was the stress worth it? Was all the effort he put into it, the sleepless nights, were they worth it? Were they worth it? You see, were they worth what he was doing? And Solomon, obviously labored much, concerning all the possessions that he had. But he said there's no profit in it. He said, the more possessions I have, what does it do for me? It gives me more heartaches. I have to think. I have no rest at night, and so forth, because of all his possessions. And you know, a friend of mine was in a certain, shall I say, locality in California. And you know, you've probably read about the fires in California, that they come over the ridges and they can wipe out whole estates very, very quickly indeed. And here was his house. That was a very nice house. And he was away from his house. He was traveling. And he heard about the flames and the fire that was coming over the ridge. And his house was a little down below. And so he phoned his wife. And he said, look, gather up certain documents, certain checkbooks and so forth, and that's all, and be prepared to leave if those flames cross over the road, because then the houses would be lost. And you know, the end of the tale was the flames were stopped, actually, on the other side of the road, and therefore they did not touch his house. But his wife said to me afterwards, you know, when reality struck, I realized very little was of importance except our lives. All the things that we had acquired were going up in flames. And she said, on those things I was not worried, it was just getting out. You know, what have we labored for? What have we acquired in this life? You know, I am very smitten, of course, with John Wesley. And John Wesley made a statement. He said, at the end of my life, I hope I have just £10, not more than £10. I'm not sure how much that is at the moment. It may be $1,000 or something like that, I don't know. But anyway, not a considerable sum. And he said, and my library, he said, and that's all I said that I acquired in life. You see, what we acquire, you see, you know, our eyes, whatsoever my eyes desired, I held not back from them. You know, we've got to be very careful. You know, what do our eyes desire? We have to control our eyes, you know, so that they do not start, you know, the heart desiring things that they see. See, that's the key in marketing. The key in marketing is to make things look so beautiful, so wonderful, so necessary that people are going to buy. But in reality, you know, the things that we have acquired in life, have they really given us satisfaction? You know, are they really important? Well, what does King Solomon say about those things? He said in verse 24, there is nothing better for a man than that he should eat and drink, that he should make his soul enjoy good in his labor. You know, there's a very interesting thing, that people who indeed work hard in a sense that they're working for a specific purpose, not to acquire, but to accomplish something, you know, the rest of the laboring man is sweet. You know, what are we working for in this life? You know, if we're working to acquire things, we are very foolish, because those things will not satisfy us. Larger houses, greater lands, more possessions, they will not satisfy. But what does satisfy in life? Well, when we look at things, we see that he is saying this, that God gives to a man that is good in his sight wisdom, knowledge, and joy. Those are the things that are eternal. Those are the things we take with us. We cannot take with us anything that we have acquired. You know, Billy Graham had the saying, he said, you never see a funeral with a U-Haul trailer. And interestingly enough, that when you listen to funeral orations, you know what basically is said, what is counted to be that of value in a man's life. Generally speaking, he's been a good husband, a good father, and that he has cared for the poor. Those are the things really that count in life. And I want to look now at what God considers the things that we should acquire after having stated the things that we shouldn't acquire. Well, those things will only bring us stress. No, the things that we should acquire are wisdom, knowledge, and joy. Now, I want to look first of all at knowledge. You know, much is said in this generation concerning education. In fact, I was talking to someone who was talking to me about a certain girl, a woman, I'm not sure how old she was. But anyway, she had gone through university, she got her bachelor's, she got her master's, and she got her PhD. And he said that she had to do postdoctoral work because now even a PhD was not esteemed sufficient in some areas. All right, what had she gotten? She had gotten knowledge. She had gotten knowledge. And you know, I was thinking, you look at the incoming cabinet that has been designated, and they are all highly educated, and they have spent their life studying, obviously, to attain where they are. Knowledge is important, but there's something greater than knowledge. You see, I have met in my life people who are very highly educated, but they haven't got wisdom. And as a result, all their education has taken them down a path that does not profit. A path that does not profit. You see, in that path, they have acquired knowledge, yes, and they've acquired probably a lot of other things. But one thing they have not acquired, and that is wisdom. And you know, King David said, wisdom is the principal thing. And Solomon looks at this theme of wisdom in the verses that we jumped over. And he said, you know, I saw that wisdom excelleth folly, as far as light excelleth darkness. The wise man's eyes are in his head, but the fool walketh in darkness. But then he said, you know, one event happens to them all. And he said, the wise man dieth as a fool. And so he said, I hated life, because the work that is wrought under the sun is grievous unto me, for all is vanity and vexation of spirit. The reason he hated life, he was working, if I could say this, in the wrong path. He was working to acquire things that could not satisfy. And then he goes on and he makes some remarkable statements here. In verse 21, he said, "For there is a man whose labour is in wisdom and in knowledge and in equity, yet to a man that hath not laboured therein shall he leave it for his portion." And then he goes on to say, "For who knoweth whether he should be a wise man? Because I should leave all I have to the man that should be after me, and I don't know if he's a wise man or a fool. Yet he shall have rule over all my labour wherein I have laboured." And that's a very interesting thing, you see, that so often as one gets older, one acquires things to pass on to the next generation, but what are they going to do with all that you have laboured to do? The thing that we have to consider is this: what is the most important thing in life? Well, you see, yes, the acquisition of knowledge, that is important. But you see, the knowledge that we acquire, is it going to profit us eternally? See, that is the question. Is it going to profit us eternally? And, I've looked at this very much for a whole week, actually, this chapter. And it's a very challenging chapter. But as we look at it, Solomon eventually arrives at the right answer. And the right answer is in wisdom, knowledge, and joy. But considering knowledge, what knowledge is it important for me to acquire? Well, the knowledge that's important for me to acquire is that's going to benefit me. That is going to benefit me. And, I think it was Pastor Rob Tucker. He was traveling in Germany in a train. And he was speaking to a young lady opposite him in the train, and they got into discussions. And it turns out that she was a student. And so he asked her what she was doing. Well, she said, "I've got my graduate, my undergraduate, I've got my graduate, and I'm doing my PhD. Well, what are you doing your PhD in? And she said, you can't believe this, I'm doing my PhD in researching Renaissance wallpaper. Bob Tucker, Rob Tucker's jaw dropped. He said, "Excuse me?" "Yes," she said, "I am researching Renaissance wallpaper. How they produced wallpaper in 1400 odd." Now, here she is, dedicating her life to some abstruse thing that cannot profit. And I think we could all see that studying, on a doctoral level, Renaissance wallpaper is a bit too much to swallow. And he said, "Well, what do you hope to do?" She said, "I hope to teach others about Renaissance wallpaper." What good in life is it to know how people produced wallpaper in the 1400 odd? Absolutely none at all. It doesn't profit you. It's a waste of time. And so you see, one thing that we've got to be very concerned about is this knowledge. What are we applying ourselves to know? Knowledge obviously is very important. Knowledge is power. But we've got to go down the right path. So many take studies. And I remember when I was in Switzerland, and there was a medical doctor. And there were 3 medical doctors actually in this village. And they arranged it that when it came vacation time, at least one of them would be there while the other 2 took vacation, and then they'd turn it around, you see, and the one that stayed would have his vacation. Well, it turned out that the one was there, the other 2 had left. So I had to go to see him, and I can't remember what it was for, but some thing, they said, well, you better get checked out. I think it's about the last time I went to a doctor, except when I came here in my 80s. So I was about 30 odd last time I went to a doctor before I was 80. And he started talking to me. He said, I'm a doctor. I said, yes. He said, but I don't want to be a doctor. Oh, I said, well, why did you study to be a doctor if you didn't want to be a doctor? Well, he said, my father, my grandfather, and so forth were all doctors of renown. And so it was esteemed that I should follow on their path. I said, well, what do you really want to do? He said, I want to be an electrical engineer. I said, oh. Well, the conversation went on a bit like that. And then afterwards, I heard a very interesting story. Still on vacation, the other 2 were away and he was there. And one of the retailers in the village had an arm that was palpitating, and he was really troubled about it. And so he went to the doctor, who wanted to be an electrician. So the doctor looked at it and said, well, we better bind up your arm, you see. So he put a lot of tape around his arm and so forth, and bandages. And he said that you'll be better. When he came back, he said, doctor, he said, I'm still having terrible pain in my arm. And he said, it's going down my side. Well, he said, let's put a bandage around your chest too. He said, that will solve it. Well, it didn't. And then he started gasping. He went to the doctor again. Doctor said, well, I better send you down to the hospital. Well, he went down to the hospital, and they determined that he was having a heart attack. You see, the electrician, was not the one who should have been examining patients. But there he was. He was on the wrong path. And many people are like that. It's so important, when you start off, that you determine what path God wants you to be on. Otherwise, you can spend many years acquiring knowledge that will ultimately not help you. And so that's very important. And I leave that with you. But the next thing is wisdom. That is the principal thing. Wisdom is the determination of the path that you should walk in life. And that is very important, you see. What is our calling? What is our calling? You see, what is God's purpose for our life? And wisdom enables us to know it. Now, Solomon, he had more wisdom than anybody, but never used his wisdom. Because in wisdom, he should have realized the acquisition of things was not going to satisfy his heart. But what does God give? Not only wisdom and knowledge, but he gives joy. And, God once spoke to me, and he said, everybody in life really wants to be satisfied. They really want to be satisfied. And you see, Solomon, he looked at all these things, and he thought by the acquisition of many things, they were going to give him what he really wanted, satisfaction in his heart. But it doesn't. Things do not satisfy. What does satisfy? What really satisfies is the joy of the Lord. If you have the joy of the Lord in your heart, you know you are satisfied, you are strong, you are happy, irrespective of what you have or in what situation you happen to be in. The joy of the Lord satisfies. And you see, this is what we have to indeed realize, that we should not run after things that cannot satisfy, but rather we should understand the three principal things that will bring us satisfaction. Knowledge of the things that God wants us to acquire that will help us in the path of his choice. Secondly, wisdom to indeed know the right path in which we should go. No good being a medical doctor if you want to be an electrical engineer. You'll be a disaster like our doctor friend in Switzerland. An absolute disaster. You know, everybody was very happy when the other two doctors got back. But, and that was known around the village, you see. But the thing is this: Lord, what is the pathway that you want me to walk on? That is the pathway that I should acquire knowledge in, wisdom to make the right choices and know that pathway. And then, above all, joy. You know, that, when you consider it, is what people want. And all these other things that they acquire are only to produce joy in their heart. You know, pleasures, the acquisition of silver, gold, and so forth, sport and the like. The reason we do those things is to satisfy our heart. But those things cannot satisfy our heart. The thing that can satisfy our heart is the gift of joy from the Lord. And as we enter this new year, you know, may we focus on these three things. Oh God, make sure, give me wisdom that I'm walking in the right path. Give me wisdom to know the knowledge that I should acquire. And oh Lord, give me that for which everybody really wants, joy in their heart. And joy is given to those who please God. Look what it says. God giveth to a man that is good in his sight. And so, you know, as the Lord Jesus Christ said, he said, I do always those things that please my Father. And you see, if we will do those things that please God, he will give us the principal things in life, wisdom, knowledge, and joy. And when you consider it, you know, everything virtually that you do is to give you satisfaction and joy. But true satisfaction comes from having the joy of Jesus. And the joy of Jesus is given to those who please him and to those that walk in wisdom and knowledge. And so our efforts in life, may they be along God's pathway, and that we don't have the misfortune in having to confess, like that doctor in Switzerland, you know, I'm a doctor, but I want to be an electrical engineer. And you know, that's a disaster when you're looking at a patient. And it's a disaster for you, it's a disaster for them. You see, you do not help people if you're on the wrong course. And so I want to leave it for the new year with that thought from Ecclesiastes chapter 2. The main thing in life is to please God, and he'll give us those things that are the most important things in life: wisdom, knowledge, and joy. And with the joy of the Lord, which is our strength, we will overcome every adversity, and we will have satisfaction and happiness, which those who seek to acquire all these things can never have. And so God grant that those three things be our portion in this life, this year: wisdom, knowledge, and joy. God bless you.